The storm did not begin with a confrontation. It began with a notification. Within hours of Hope and Liam's wedding photographs flooding social media feeds with curated joy and carefully filtered vows, another set of images surfaced. Grainy, intimate, damning in their ambiguity. They showed Steffy and Liam inside her home. The lighting was soft, almost romantic. One frame captured Liam leaning in close, his expression unreadable. Another froze a moment where Steffy's hand appeared to rest lightly against his chest. There was no audio, no context, only implication. In a digital age where suggestion often outweighs truth, it was more than enough. The reality was painfully ordinary. Liam had gone to Steffy's house to discuss Kelly's upcoming birthday. Co-parenting required coordination, and despite years of emotional turbulence, they had reached a fragile understanding for their daughter's sake. The conversation had been practical, restrained. They had spoken about decorations, schedules, guest lists. But the camera lens that captured those moments had done so from a distance. Angled through partially drawn curtains. Freezing gestures mid-motion. In stillness, nuance disappears. What had been a neutral conversation now looked like a secret rendezvous. The timing was catastrophic. Hope had barely stepped into married life when whispers began. Comments spread like wildfire. The narrative formed instantly. Steffy, unable to let go of Liam, sabotaging Hope's happiness yet again. It was a story audiences were primed to believe. History had conditioned them. The triangle between these three had once dominated every headline. The idea that it might be reignited felt almost inevitable. Hope saw the images alone in the early hours of the morning. At first, she thought they were fabricated. Then she recognized the living room, the framed photograph on the wall behind Liam's shoulder. Her heart tightened with a familiar ache she had sworn she would never feel again. She had walked down the aisle believing the past was finally buried. Now it felt as though it had clawed its way back to the surface. Anger came quickly, but beneath it simmered something more fragile, fear. Fear that history was cyclical. Fear that love built on second chances might not withstand another betrayal. She told herself the images could be misleading. But the comments under the posts were merciless. Words like homewrecker and unfinished business dominated the thread. The world had already judged. Steffy, meanwhile, encountered the fallout in a different way. She arrived at the office to find tension thick in the hallways. Assistants avoided eye contact. Publicists whispered urgently behind closed doors. She did not need to open her phone to understand what had happened. She had lived long enough under scrutiny to recognize the atmosphere of scandal. When she finally saw the photographs, her jaw tightened. Not because she feared they revealed guilt, but because she understood precisely how they would be interpreted. The framing was deliberate. The leak was strategic. Someone had wanted this narrative to ignite. Whether it was an opportunistic paparazzo or a more calculated adversary, she could not yet tell. What she did know was that denial would only fuel speculation. Hope did not wait long before confronting her. The office door closed with a force that echoed through the corridor. Hope's composure, carefully maintained in public, dissolved the moment she faced Steffy alone. She demanded an explanation, her voice trembling not only with anger but with humiliation. She had married Liam believing she was stepping into stability. Now she felt exposed, foolish under the glare of public ridicule. Steffy listened without interruption. Her posture was straight, her expression composed to the point of coldness. She did not rush to defend herself. She did not offer context about birthday plans or co-parenting logistics. Instead, she met Hope's fury with silence. It was not indifference, but pride, a refusal to beg for belief from someone who had never truly trusted her. When she finally spoke, her words were measured and sharp. If Hope was confident in her marriage, she suggested, then she should hold on to her husband tightly. Love, after all, was not secured through public validation but through private trust. The implication stung. It reframed the issue as Hope's insecurity rather than Steffy's misconduct. To Hope, it sounded like arrogance. To Steffy, it was armor. The truth was far more complicated than either woman was willing to admit. Steffy had indeed felt a flicker of loneliness seeing Liam move forward. Their history was layered with passion, betrayal, reconciliation, and loss. Watching him commit fully to Hope forced her to confront the finality of that chapter. She had told herself she was at peace with it. But peace is not always immediate. Sometimes it arrives in fragments, after waves of quiet grief. Her silence during Hope's confrontation was not a confession. It was self-preservation. To explain herself would mean acknowledging how vulnerable she felt. How the sight of wedding photos had reopened wounds she thought had healed. Pride is often mistaken for cruelty. In reality, it can be a shield against collapse. But perception rarely aligns with intent. Hope left the office more convinced than ever that Steffy was playing a dangerous game. The refusal to clarify felt like defiance. She interpreted Steffy's composure as calculated provocation. By the time she reached her car, she had already decided she would not allow this narrative to define her marriage. The media, sensing conflict, escalated coverage. Headlines multiplied. Analysts dissected body language from the leaked images. Old footage of past rivalries resurfaced. Social media transformed the situation into spectacle. Teams aligned themselves with either woman, reviving arguments that had once seemed resolved. What began as a misunderstanding evolved into a public war. Publicists advised Steffy to issue a statement clarifying the visit's purpose. She refused. To defend herself would suggest she had done something wrong. She would not legitimize gossip with explanation. Her defiance, however, was interpreted as indifference. Sponsors grew nervous. Board members whispered about reputational risk. Hope, under pressure from her own advisors, released a carefully worded message emphasizing trust in her marriage while subtly condemning interference. The subtext was unmistakable. It did not name Steffy directly, but the implication hung heavy. Behind closed doors, Liam found himself trapped between two storms. He insisted the visit had been innocent, that nothing inappropriate had occurred. He was frustrated by the narrative but underestimated its emotional toll on Hope. His reassurances sounded rehearsed, inadequate against the tide of speculation. Trust strained under the weight of public doubt. Kelly's birthday, the very subject of the original visit, became secondary to the chaos it had unintentionally sparked. What should have been a simple co-parenting conversation now symbolized suspicion. Steffy began to feel the isolation she had masked so well. Colleagues watched her differently. Invitations felt colder. Even in rooms full of people, she sensed the quiet judgment. Pride sustained her publicly, but privately she grappled with exhaustion. The loneliness she had tried to conceal now intensified under scrutiny. Hope, too, suffered in ways she did not admit. Each comment online chipped away at her confidence. She hated that strangers were debating the strength of her marriage. She hated that Steffy's mere presence in Liam's life could destabilize her sense of security. Her anger toward Steffy was fueled not only by suspicion but by the fear that she would always be compared. The war became self-perpetuating. Every new headline reignited conflict. Every interview, every subtle comment added fuel. Neither woman had intended to escalate the situation to this magnitude. Yet neither was willing to retreat first. At the heart of it all lay a fragile truth. Both were reacting to vulnerability rather than malice. Steffy's silence was a defense against heartbreak. Hope's outrage was a defense against insecurity. But defenses, when misunderstood, become weapons. The leaked photographs continued to circulate, stripped of context, frozen in ambiguity. They had captured a moment that meant nothing, yet transformed it into something destructive. In an era where image often outweighs reality, narrative can eclipse truth. As the episode closes, the camera lingers on two separate spaces. Hope stands in her home, staring at her wedding ring with renewed determination, vowing not to let history repeat itself. Across town, Steffy sits alone in her living room, the same room where the photographs were taken, her expression unreadable as she contemplates how easily perception can become destiny. The battle between them has only begun. Not because either woman truly seeks to destroy the other, but because neither is willing to expose the fear that drives her. And until vulnerability replaces pride, the war will rage on. Not just in headlines, but in the quiet spaces where love and ego collide. The silence between Hope and Steffy did not cool the fire. It fed it. Within days, what had begun as a whisper became a full-scale narrative war. Commentators dissected the leaked photographs with forensic intensity. Digital enhancement videos slowed down gestures, zoomed into body language, froze facial expressions mid-breath as if truth could be extracted from pixels. The more the footage was analyzed, the less it resembled reality. It became myth, an emotional fiction shaped by bias and memory rather than fact. Hope tried to focus on her marriage. She told herself that Liam's reassurance should be enough. He had repeated the same explanation. He had gone to discuss Kelly's birthday. Nothing inappropriate had happened. He had not touched Steffy beyond what courtesy required. He had not betrayed her. Yet reassurance spoken under public scrutiny carries a different weight. Each time Liam insisted on innocence, Hope heard the echo of the past. Years when lines between Steffy and Liam blurred in moments of vulnerability. Love triangles leave permanent scars. Even when healed, the skin remains thinner. Liam felt the pressure tightening around him like a vice. He hated that he had become the silent center of a conflict between two women he cared about deeply. In different ways. He loved Hope. That truth felt solid. But he also shared a history with Steffy that could never be erased. Co-parenting meant boundaries were never absolute. The photographs, however misleading, forced him to confront how fragile those boundaries appeared to outsiders, and perhaps even to himself. Meanwhile, Steffy stood firm in her refusal to publicly defend herself. Advisors warned her that silence would be interpreted as arrogance. She responded that defending herself would only legitimize gossip. Privately, though, she wrestled with an uncomfortable realization. Part of her silence was defiance, but part of it was grief. Watching Liam step fully into a future with hope had stirred something she had tried to bury. A sense of finality that she was not as prepared for as she believed. That grief, however, was not a desire to reclaim him. It was something subtler and more painful. It was the acknowledgement that the version of her life that once seemed possible had definitively ended. She had chosen independence, resilience, strength. But independence does not shield against loneliness. Seeing Liam celebrated in a new marriage forced her to confront the spaces in her own life that remained unfilled. Hope interpreted Steffy's composed defiance as cruelty. When Steffy told her to hold on to her husband tightly if she truly believed in her marriage, the words echoed long after the confrontation ended. Hope replayed them in her mind during quiet evenings at home. Was it a challenge? A warning? Or simply a reflection of Steffy's own unresolved emotions? The media sensed blood and escalated further. Anonymous sources began feeding tabloids with insinuations that Steffy had always struggled to let Liam go. Old clips resurfaced of moments when Liam had wavered between the two women. Hashtags divided fans into camps. Comment sections devolved into vicious attacks. What had once been a private misunderstanding now felt like a public referendum on character. At Forrester Creations, the tension spilled into professional spaces. Board members questioned whether the scandal could impact investor confidence. Meetings that should have focused on fashion lines were overshadowed by crisis management. Hope felt the weight of judgment in conference rooms. Steffy felt it in whispered side conversations that ceased when she entered. The war was no longer emotional alone. It had become strategic. Hope's publicist suggested a televised interview to present her perspective calmly and confidently. The goal was to control the narrative before it spiraled further. Hope hesitated. She did not want to appear insecure, but she also refused to be painted as naive. The interview aired within days. She spoke with grace, emphasizing trust in her husband while expressing disappointment in anyone who would interfere with newlyweds. She never named Steffy, but the implication was unmistakable. The response was explosive. Supporters praised Hope's composure. Critics accused her of passive aggression. And Steffy, watching the interview alone in her living room, felt something shift. For the first time, she realized that her silence was no longer a shield, it was a liability. The narrative had hardened against her. The next morning, she issued a brief statement. It was restrained but firm. She clarified that Liam had visited solely to discuss Kelly's birthday and that any suggestion otherwise was false. She expressed disappointment that private co-parenting matters had been weaponized for spectacle. She did not attack Hope directly. She did not apologize. But by then, the battle lines had been drawn. Hope interpreted the statement as calculated damage control. Why now? Why not explain immediately? The timing felt reactive rather than sincere. She confronted Liam again, this time not with tears but with sharp precision. She asked whether there were any emotions left unresolved between him and Steffy. Any lingering attachment that could invite ambiguity. Liam's frustration boiled over. He insisted that his past with Steffy did not define his present. He accused Hope of allowing public opinion to dictate private trust. The argument escalated into something deeper than photographs. It became about faith, about whether love built on history can truly withstand scrutiny. Kelly's birthday approached under a cloud of tension. What should have been a celebration of a child became a test of adult maturity. Both women agreed to attend for Kelly's sake. The gathering was small but tense. Every glance between Liam and Steffy felt scrutinized. Hope watched with quiet vigilance. Steffy maintained careful distance, aware that any gesture could be misinterpreted. During the party, an unexpected development shifted the atmosphere yet again. A digital forensics specialist, quietly hired by Forrester's legal team, reported preliminary findings about the leaked images. Metadata suggested the photographs had not been taken spontaneously by paparazzi. They appeared to have been captured through a long-range lens from a neighboring property, then edited to enhance intimacy through selective cropping. The implication was chilling. Someone had orchestrated the leak deliberately. The revelation introduced a new possibility. Neither Hope nor Steffy had initiated the scandal. They were both pawns in a larger manipulation. The knowledge unsettled them in different ways. For Hope, it introduced doubt about her certainty. For Steffy, it confirmed her suspicion that the narrative had been engineered. But truth emerging did not immediately erase damage done. Even as suspicion shifted toward an unknown source, pride prevented immediate reconciliation. Too much had been said publicly. Too many lines had been drawn. Admitting misunderstanding would require vulnerability neither woman found easy to offer. Later that evening, after guests departed and Kelly drifted to sleep, Steffy stood alone in her quiet house. The same living room where the photographs had been taken felt heavier than ever. She replayed her own reaction to Hope's accusation. She had chosen pride instead of empathy. Perhaps if she had acknowledged Hope's fear rather than challenging it, the fire would not have spread so violently. Across town, Hope removed her wedding ring and placed it gently on her nightstand. Not as a declaration of defeat but as a moment of introspection. She realized that her anger toward Steffy had been fueled as much by insecurity as by evidence. Loving Liam meant accepting his history, not pretending it did not exist. The war, once driven by ego and perception, now hovered at a crossroads. If they continued, it would escalate beyond repair. Into lawsuits, public humiliation, professional fallout. If they paused, it would require humility neither had yet displayed. The episode closes on parallel images. Steffy staring at the city lights from her window, the glow reflecting in eyes that finally soften with exhaustion rather than defiance. Hope sitting quietly in the dim light of her bedroom, her expression no longer furious but contemplative. Somewhere in the shadows, the architect of the leak remains unseen, satisfied that two powerful women nearly destroyed each other without realizing they were being manipulated. The next move will determine whether the war becomes irreversible, or whether truth, once fully uncovered, forces them to confront not only the source of the scandal but the fragile pride that allowed it to.